Speaking today about what happened in the occupied territories, today at least 27 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza and the West Bank. There was an assassination attempt against the head of Palestinian security services in Gaza, Jayda. In addition to that, there was the bombing 2 days ago of Palestinian President Yasser Arafat's buildings, in which a lot of people have been killed. The cycle of violence from the Israeli side is continuing to rise. At this moment, there is the Saudi initiative, which came from Prince Abdullah.
Yes.
A lot of people are pinning hopes on the Saudi initiative. Actually, Crown Prince Abdullah is taking the initiative to Beirut for the Arab Summit to make it as a unified Arab initiative. Do you find the initiative having any chance of success?
Well, I do not believe the Israelis will accept it unless they have some security guarantee that gives them at least maximum security against further...
Is this why Bush sent Zini back to the region and Dick Cheney?
I don't know. I hope so. I really believe that U.S. troops are an essential part of any durable peace agreement. The layers of hatred and blood on both sides are so deep that we can't expect the parties to bury the hatchet and be nice to each other all at once.
But can Arabs and Muslims trust Americans? In 1967, President Nasser was given assurances by the U.S. President and by the Soviets back then that if Egypt does not attack Israel, the U.S. and the Soviet Union back then would guarantee the Egyptian forces security. President Nasser listened to them, and look what happened. The 1967 major defeat for the Arabs, the occupying of Sinai, Golan Heights, West Bank and Gaza. So this is the time, this is a clear incident where we trusted the Americans, or the U.S. administration, not even the Americans, even the Soviet bloc as well, the two major superpowers, and look what we got in return. So if one thing teaches us from history is that the more you trust the Americans and maybe the U.S. and the Western allies who have interests with Israel. I mean, even now, Russia, there's a lot of Jews from Russian origin who are citizens of Israel. I don't think Russia will jeopardize their life. So do you think we can trust, or is there a chance of mutual trust of America playing, even now in the Middle East? America is supposed to be one of the sponsors of the peace process. Look what it's done. It's taking a backstage, and even the European Union has called on America to play a more active role.
Well, my short answer is there a better hope today? And I don't know of a better hope. My little bit longer answer is that for many years, U.S. troops have monitored the border between Egypt and Israel without incident. It's been highly successful. I was on the subcommittee that dealt with the legislation for that. And the first version had the UN providing the monitoring forces. Israel wouldn't accept it. They didn't trust UN forces to protect Israel's interests. But they did accept the promise of U.S. troops being the main element in an international force along that border. It has worked. I don't know why it wouldn't work throughout the entire border between Israel and Palestine. In any event, I think it's the very best hope we have today, and I think it ought to be pursued as to the very greatest extent possible. Allahu Akbar, Allahu
Akbar. Another situation which seems to annoy a lot of Arabs and Muslims in the Middle East and in the rest of the Muslim world is the situation, for example, in Iraq. I mean, there are UN resolutions. But on a number of occasions, Iraq has complied with many of the UN resolutions, and in return, what Iraq has received, for example, is UN weapons inspectors who have spied for Israel and the United States. And they've confessed that. Richard Butler, Scott Ritter, they've all spoken about it. For example, we have a situation now where the region is getting tense. There are talks of the axis of evil, Iran being included now, Iraq, strikes.
Ridiculous.
I mean, how can we handle such a situation? I mean, America is out there to get, for example, 1 million Iraqis have killed because of the UN sanctions. I mean, How can the American conscience accept such a reality?
I regret our bombardment. I regret our sanctions against Iraq. We should have learned years ago that sanctions have little effect on the behavior of a leader. If we had ended sanctions between the U.S. and Cuba, Castro would have been gone years ago. We have, in a sense, kept Saddam Hussein in power by the sanctions. He's become more of a hero with the Iraqi people than he would have been in the absence of the sanctions. The sanctions have not worked. They have not been of any value, and I think they ought to be ended. They have indeed caused a lot of hardship to innocent people, especially children within Iraq. And I also have to add that the authority for the U.S. and Britain to undertake these assaults, the aerial surveillance, the violation of sovereign territory of the state of Iraq, is questionable under international law. There is no clear authority given to our government to maintain that assault, that surveillance, either by congressional action, by the U.S. Constitution, or by the actions of the UN Security Council.
Coming back to the situation in the Middle East, the Palestinians and the Israelis, and of course the role the pro-Israeli lobby is playing in the United States, the Saudi initiative, it will be delivered to the Arab Summit on the 27th and 28th. There are talks that the Arabs will accept it. If the Arabs accept the Saudi initiative and present it to the table for Israel, and Israel rejects it, what should the Arabs do then, in your opinion?
Well, there may be voices within Israel supporting it. Maybe Paris will speak up for it, the foreign minister. Maybe Ariel Sharon, the butcher of Beirut, the old warmonger whose hands are very bloody, might see this as the chance to write a brilliant chapter in the history books in behalf of peace for Israel. Now that would surprise everyone, including Ariel Sharon, I suppose, but think back on earlier American history. Imagine Richard Nixon going to China, communist China, working out a deal for normalization with China, with his record as an anti-communist all of his political career. If he had been defeated for president, and if there had been Hubert Humphrey, the Democrat, going to China to normalize relations, a lot of pundits have said, well, Nixon would have been in Indianapolis the next day denouncing Hubert for doing it. But Nixon, because of his anti-communist past, was able to pull it off. Maybe Sharon will see that because of his past as a belligerent against Arabs, against Palestinians, will be able to pull off a deal like this to the advantage of the Israeli people, to bring to an end the anxiety that these human beings on the Israeli side must feel every day of every year. Things are getting worse for the Israeli people as well as for the Palestinians. And maybe he'll decide, well, here's a chance to bring it to an end.
If it doesn't happen?
If it doesn't happen, I think that
the Arabs then have the right to find other means of getting the rights back?
Well, the cycle of violence may rise. It probably will. I don't think the Palestinians are going to quit the assaults on Israeli citizens. I think that'll probably intensify, if anything. I'm sure that many Israelis will find a way to believe and have a happier life in another country. It may well be that there will be a civil war within Israel between those who want the accommodation with the Palestinians and those that demand that the settlements keep growing. So a lot of terrible things are possible, and in that scene I don't see much bright hope for anything but violence. And I think the Israelis ought to recognize that because of demography, time is not on Israel.